Hey guys, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Thanks for joining me. This will be a little bit of a different video because I just needed to get a few things off my chest. Yesterday I did a video where I shared a side-by-side of a video that was done by Jaclyn Glenn and then another one that was a response by a woman named Morgan Olliges, and she and her husband Paul have a channel called the Paul and Morgan Show. And Jaclyn is someone who I respect very much and has been on YouTube for a very long time and used her platform in a way that, for the most part, I've thought has been positive and amazing. And Morgan and Paul are a channel that I don't particularly enjoy, but it's not necessarily like someone that I'm automatically going to dislike. It's just I can't watch the content because the messages of what they say, how they deliver it, all of that. There was this situation that occurred where Jaclyn made a video, and there's a long backstory here. You have a group of people on one side of a spectrum and another group of people on another side that think very differently. And they are critical of one another, right? And in a way to build content and get views, sometimes they will provoke one another to react and do things, to say things. And, YouTube is a messy place and it's a weird place. And after almost a year on this platform, I'm still feeling kind of shell-shocked at times about what happens and how the lines get blurred, right? So I made a video about how Jaclyn Glenn is concerned about Morgan and her relationship with Paul. And this has been sort of this cascading event for Morgan and Paul where they are saying that what Jaclyn is saying about her and him is not true. And it is bringing an onset of criticism to them and sort of scrutiny to them that they didn't really believe that they signed up for. And then you have Jaclyn saying that this is something that she's concerned about and she had to say it on YouTube, right? Because what better place to actually get things done than to make a video and call out your friends? No, just kidding. Anyways. So I have to be honest, and this is where we're going to get off sidetracked. But I knew people like Paul and Morgan not too long ago. Like, seriously. And like within the last few years. And I was involved with a church that was similar to what they probably go to. Maybe not the same. I would say the version that I was in was a lighter version of what they have, but it's all packaged. It might be packaged differently with the sermons being a shorter period of time, and maybe the pastor that I had not being as controversial in what he said, but the underlying sentiment and the underlying doctrine was the same, because my pastor came from a Pentecostal upbringing. Now, I came from a Catholic upbringing, and I spent my entire life in the Catholic Church with my family, my grandparents. My mother went to Catholic school. My grandparents were very involved in their local Catholic church, Holy Family. I attended Mass and Catechism at a church called St. John's. I was baptized, first, confirmation. I went all the way up communion. I mean, I did everything, right? And my confirmation was kind of the end for me, because after all of that time and I decided to become a member of the church, I went through the entire teaching and I realized I didn't like it. The more I learned about the church, the more I learned about the practices, the more I learned about the doctrine, the more I learned about the hierarchy, Rome, the Pope, the saints, all of it. I just didn't agree with it. I didn't agree with the way women were treated. I didn't agree with the way that it was handled in my family. I didn't agree with the way it divided my family. My grandparents were very steadfast in their belief until the very end. And my mom and her sisters, they kind of rejected it. And as they rejected it, it became an issue within our family. And it ultimately divided the family to a point where my grandmother would only, every time we were together, would always talk to us about why we weren't in church, reminding us why we needed to be in church. And even at my grandfather's funeral, made some statements that just weren't very flattering about what happened to him and why he passed away. And it's messy, right? And so going through that experience, I never wanted to get back involved in a church. And I was thinking about this because for a long time, I just stayed in this place where I was like, I don't know what I believe. I'm not sure. I think there's something, but there's not. And I did a lot of exploring. I was like into rocks for a while. I meditated. I was into yoga. I read about Taoism and Hinduism and all the different Eastern philosophies. And I got to this place where it's like, well, if there's so many different beliefs in the world, how is there one that's true? And so I just sort of came to a place where I just was like, I don't believe anything. And then my husband's mother got sick, and then my uncle got sick, and then our family got really rattled by my son's health. And I ended up feeling very vulnerable and very alone. We had just moved to this like sort of rural community where it was great because we could have a larger home and a really good school system for my son, but I didn't have a lot of friends because everyone around us was in church. And so I, maybe indirectly dealing with the grief of what was going on in my family and with my son, was seeking something. I needed a community. I needed something. I needed a place to go. And I needed a sense of I would have support. I would have friendship. I would have kinship. I would have people that were like-minded. I could connect to and feel a sense of community. Like I was longing for that during that time. And so the only thing that they had out here were churches. And I was like, well, if I were in the city, I could do, different social events. They just don't have that here. So more and more I was talking to people in the community, and a couple of people brought up this one church, and you should just check it out. It'll be very different. I was very reluctant because of what I went through growing up in my Catholic faith. And I was like, I don't want to do another church, but one of my friends told me about this place, said check this out. I went onto the website. Everything looked very different. The sermons were packaged in a way where it was like you wrote out, it was like a self-help booklet every day for the week with questions and a study guide. And the sermons were taking verses from the Bible and sort of packaging them into a way to help you live a better life, which is really not how the Bible was written. If you know the Bible, it's not designed to be a self-help book, but rather the Word of God. But the way that they packaged it, it felt like you were taking what the Bible said and using how to implement it. It felt like going to school and having a section where you studied, and then here's the verses, and this is how you apply it. It felt like being a psychology class, and I enjoyed that. And not really thinking about how the verses in context meant or what the actual Bible said, and I had read the Bible, but when you're Catholic, some of us don't really read it because the priests go through it in Mass, and every year it's like they go through the books, and everything is very controlled in the Catholic Church. And while some people are very reading their Bibles and stuff, there's a lot of those Catholics that just don't. They just rely on the priests and the community, right? So this was a different experience for me, like really getting into the Word, really getting into the Bible. And I went to my first service there, and it was like I can't even describe it. I remember I walked in, and it was like at a high school or middle school, and it was loud. There was like loud music, which was very different. I grew up with hymns, sitting, kneeling, and organs. And this was rock bands, and people had hot coffee, and they were dressed really hipster, and like cute skinny jeans, and women that had super cute tops on and lots of cute makeup, and not enough makeup, but not a ton of makeup, but just enough, and cute clothing that was stylish yet modest. And everyone was really happy and really bubbly, and it felt very welcoming. And I was at a spot in my life where I needed that. And I remember walking in feeling like, oh my God, I don't have to be alone. And I sat through my first service and I cried because it had been such a long time since I had been in any sort of church. And I remember feeling guilty because that's what you do when you're Catholic. And I remember feeling like I want to have this feeling again. I just want to keep having that feeling. I don't know that I wanted to believe. I just wanted to have that feeling because I'd felt so alone for such a long time. And suddenly I found myself invested and involved in this group. I didn't know anything about their doctrine, very limited. I mean, their website was it gave you enough without giving you much. And that's how a lot of these websites and a lot of these sort of rock band churches work, where you feel like you're walking into a modern place where there's modern thoughts and modern feelings, and you won't have to deal with the guilt or the shame or the judgment that comes along with some forms of Christianity. And so I thought I would be safe there. I thought I would make friends there. I thought I could maybe rediscover and explore my faith. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, because I've always credited myself for being a very logical, pragmatic thinker, critical thinker. I got really invested, and I was going to groups all the time, and I was going to women's groups and Bible studies and home churches, and I was volunteering. And initially, what it looked like on the surface was a group of people that were in life together, doing life together, helping people, supporting one another, helping people live throughout and be their best selves, and without the guilt of, am I going to be part of something that is anti-LGBTQ plus? Am I going to be something that's in a system that is patriarchal and anti-women? Those were my biggest concerns. And for a while, I was able to ignore things. And then I learned pretty quickly that the pastor, over time, I learned that he came from a Pentecostal background, and he had grown up in the Assemblies of God. And they are very charismatic. They speak in tongues. They're very strict. He grew up not drinking alcohol. He and his wife were saved themselves. I don't even know if they kissed before they got married. His children were homeschooled. He and all of their friends homeschooled their kids. And then I started getting more invested and more ingrained in this. And I started looking around me, and I realized every single person in my life was homeschooling their kids. Many of them were very critical of the government. They were apprehensive when they discussed politics, but they were very adamant about their beliefs. People that I never would have been friends with before, who were against people in the LGBTQ plus, became my friends. People that were anti-choice, which was something I was very not okay with. I had always been a pro-choice kind of girl. And people that were anti-education and suspicious of the public schools, which was crazy to me because my mom was a teacher and my father was on the school board. And my dad worked in public health my whole life. And so I was a girl that was all about the public schools. I went to public high school. I went to the public university. I mean, I was all about being secular. And I started watching myself slowly morphing into this thing that I didn't understand. And I started becoming suspicious of school because everyone around me was homeschooling. But everyone didn't look like what I thought. I imagined homeschoolers in the Christian world to be like what you see on the Duggars, right? And I imagined the bigotry to be not in a church like that, but it was there. I remember sitting at a sermon and my pastor basically saying that men and women should not be friends, and men should be the leader of the church, of the family, and that women must submit to their husbands, and that husbands should not look online at certain things, and women and men should be very careful about what they do online. And he often talked about how if you're married and you are friends with another person of the opposite sex, you are basically committing adultery, and men should watch their wives. And it was all packaged in a way where you felt like what you were hearing wasn't what it was. I don't know how to say that, but it was very old school, let's just say, but yet presented in a way where it didn't feel that way. So you didn't really know what you were hearing. It's hard to explain. But suddenly I started following around my husband, who I'd never been in a situation where I was like, yes, I must submit to you, and like demanding that he lead the family, like, you need to be our leader, like, you need to come to church too. And I got him involved, and I start working on getting my son in homeschooling, and I'm making bone broth because I'm scared of all of the chemicals, and suddenly we're questioning medicine, and everything that I had once been so steadfast knowing that was okay, I suddenly found myself like in an alternate universe. And even when I was in the Catholic Church, this didn't happen, like, at all. At all. I realized that indirectly I got involved with a church that was all about the Spirit, and the Spirit moving within you and controlling you and having a relationship with the Spirit, but not speaking in tongues. So very Pentecostal-like, without the tongue speaking. And it was very much people constantly talking about the Holy Spirit working within them, speaking through them, guiding them to do things, moving them towards things. And everyone was always very, wanting to pray over people. I mean, prayer circles where people were like putting their hands on people. It was very different than what I grew up in, and it was very weird. And the people that knew me in my life were very like taken aback by this sort of presentation, because what I was starting to espouse and say and talk about, I mean, my feed on Facebook and on Twitter at the time, it was all about God, and I was writing passages, and I was sharing like Psalms and Proverbs, and I was listening to Bethel music and Hillsong. And if you know anything about Bethel, I mean, come on, I was rocking to Bethel music, and this is like a faith healing church. I didn't even know that that's what they did, but that's what we listened to at church. And it didn't even hit me until it was a very slow process where I found myself more and more falling away from myself and getting more and more surrounded. And the further I got in, the more the church wanted from me. So it was make sure that you're volunteering, make sure that you're tithing at least, X percent, make sure that you're involved in your groups. And so it got to a point where I was at church on Sundays, groups on Mondays, groups on Wednesdays. I did youth group for a while. I was doing Meals on Wheels with them. I was volunteering. I was helping with getting Sunday school stuff ready. I was walking people and greeting people at church and taking their kids to Sunday school. I was like leading Bible studies. I somehow got into this position where I don't even know. All I remember wanting was community, and I suddenly was like so deep into something that I didn't even know what it was. And the only friends that I had anymore were within the church, and they were like, yes, just hang out with your friends. Yes, just hang out with us. Make your community here. Don't worry about the outside world. Your family is here. And it was presented in such a way that you didn't even think about how you might be starting to isolate yourself from everyone else around you, because your beliefs are kind of like, I remember just being like, God is with me everywhere. Just like I felt intoxicated by the Spirit. That's how it made me feel. That's what it was, which is kind of how the Pentecostal church works. And you feel so drunk on it that you just want it all the time, even though it's not, I don't even know if it's real. But I remember my parents just being like, I don't even know who you are. One of my best friends was just like, who are you? And like going to family events and feeling like I was better than everyone because I was at church, going to Bible studies and dissecting what everyone else was doing out in the world that wasn't Christian or wasn't walking in our faith, criticizing people, analyzing how they're not being like God. And I started to realize slowly but surely that everything that I had once held dear to me because the pastors said you don't need college education, you don't need public schools. Women, you don't need to work out of the home. I quit my job during this time, mind you. Yeah, I did. I became a stay-at-home mom. That was never my plan. Husbands, don't don't be friends with men. Let your husband sleep. I mean, I became like Betty Homemaker. It was like I was in the Twilight Zone. And I remember one day feeling really disenchanted because I noticed after a couple of years that everything in the church got weirder and weirder. The pastor, I think he got into an argument with one of the other pastors and kicked him out, but it was very abruptly. And I remember I sat down with the pastor that left, and he just said, I want to be a part of a church that does more for the community. And I was like, because this church always said that we were doing things for the community. And then I started to think about it, and I was like, wait a minute. What do we do for the community? Nothing. Anytime they had something to do for the community, like backpacks for kids, where you would get a backpack for like a kid and that couldn't afford it, or say like a Christmas tree where you give gifts to kids or families that you like sponsor a child, the church never sponsored it. We did. So a church would just coordinate it, and then we paid for everything. They had different events that we could volunteer for that were for other events, but the church didn't pay for it or sponsor it. So there wasn't really a community outreach, in fact, at all. There wasn't any sort of services set up for families. There was nothing set up for families, for children with special needs. There was no services or support for women or really for anything. And which was very different, because if you think about the Catholic Church, it's very, they have the Catholic Charities. So when he said that, I started to look inward, and I thought, oh my God, there is nothing going on here. Like, what are we doing? And then when family members or people were struggling, I noticed that within the community that nobody was helping these people. So when a member of the church was struggling financially or something, the church wasn't offering to help them, or if they did, it was very minimal. And I remember sitting there listening to the pastor, and he was talking about how he wanted to build this humongous church, and he got jealous of other pastors who were able to build such successful churches, and that, he would see them in their cars and he would want those cars, but he would say, I'm not going to have one of those cars. I'm not going to do that. You'll never have to worry about it. You'll never have to worry about, what I take for this, what I take for that. But during this time, they decided they wanted to build a church because we were still staying in that, middle school. And the disclosures for the money was so bizarre. Like, we didn't know what people were making. We were just supposed to know the pastor's wife was doing the books, which seemed weird to me. They started asking us for not only tithing, but a percentage on top of that to pledge to help them build this building. So more and more the demands for money got higher and higher and higher, with no sort of understanding about where the money was going and what it was going to, because the money, they didn't have that many expenses at the time, and the money was not going back to the community at this point because they weren't doing outreach or any sort of charity. And they kept saying, well, we'll do more charity once we get there. The only goal that this church had was to bring more people to Jesus. So that's all he wanted, was to save you. And then once you got there, there was nothing there. Every sermon was the same. Year after year, they did the same series over and over and over again, because they said that they just had to keep making it highlight and easy for people to come in. And then they wanted you to help them bring people in, invite your friends, make sure they come here. And then once you got there, there was this sort of emptiness of what next, right? And you start becoming part of this machine, and you're slowly separating yourself from everyone around you. And then you've got a pastor that has no accountability. There's no denomination around him, no rules. He kicks out the other pastor, and then drunk on power, anytime one of the members says to him, what about these, could you do something different here? Could we add services here? Or could we do this? Or could we do that? It was always met by, if this is not how you like it, you can leave. This is my church, and this is what we're going to do. And I remember asking him one time, like, how do people become pastors? Like, what is the, what are the credentials or what is the process? And he went through a program in the Pentecostal church, mind you. And so but there was no females that were leading. And although we would never say it, that was very understood that women were not to be pastors. And so slowly I realized that I had joined almost like a cult where he had created this space where everyone around him bent to his knees. He was on the stage like the rock star after worship, and he gave us tools and told us how to live, yet he didn't have really formal education at all. He had no business telling us how to live. He didn't really even have much for pastoral ministry studies at all. He didn't have a very good theological background. He had somehow built this church based on what he had learned because his father was a pastor in the Pentecostal church, and taken that charisma that's a part of the church and turned it into a modern day rock show that was packaging fundamental beliefs behind this bow of acceptance. And I remember the morning I woke up and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, and I couldn't believe that I got involved in this. Because I realized that all the friends I made, I started voicing my concerns, and some of them shared the same things, but they weren't going to leave. Others did leave because it started getting weirder and weirder. But I remember this sort of come to realization with my husband, and I said, I can't do this anymore. We were 3 years in, we were thousands of dollars of donations and tithing and hours of sweat and tears of volunteering. And I remember saying to him, I think we're like in a cult. And it was the craziest experience. Like we left. And it wasn't like we had to flee for our lives, but we lost everything. It was insane. We had become isolated from all of our outside friends because we had ingrained and sculpted our life around these group of people, assuming that if we left, it wouldn't be a big deal. These people would still be our friends. We had spent so much time with them. They were going to be there for us. That's what this was about, right? Wrong. When I started voicing my concerns and my doubts, it was met with, you can't leave. You're just thinking this wrong. No, you just have to keep going. No, that's not true, Katie. And I would point out things that I noticed about the financing, about the money, about the way that the group was run with the beliefs and the homeschooling and the Holy Spirit and the charisma and all of that wasn't really doctrine. It was like whatever he had designed it to be. It wasn't a faith at all. It was whatever he designed it to be. Had some sort of Bethel light. And it's crazy because we left 2 years ago in January. That was like the last time we went. So in 2018 was the last time we went. And I was like shell-shocked because I never thought in my life I could get involved in something like that. And I never thought for my life that I would like expose my child to something like that, or that I would somehow end up in a belief system where I would want to pull my kids out of school and not be around people and literally call people that weren't in our group worldly. Yeah, that's seriously what I used to say, worldly. And speak a language that like a lot of people didn't understand, and feeling like deceived because I realized I had been love bombed. I had been brought into a situation at my most vulnerable point and sort of suffocated by the affection and the attention, told that I was going to have all of these things. And then when I got in there and I realized and started questioning, I soon realized that nothing was as it seemed. And when we finally left, it was very quiet, but it was also very loud because the people around us noticed. And when I tried to speak out on social media, I was met with a lot of pushback. A lot of people blocked me. A lot of people told me I was lying when I made statements about the financials or about the leadership or about the doctrine or just about the overall community. It was like I was lying, and soon we had no friends at all. So we went from being surrounded by people every single day, 4 to 5 times a week, to having nothing, not a single person. And it was like losing everything. And it still kind of shocks me to say that out loud. 1, that I got involved in it. 2, that I invested time in it. But 3, that people that I thought I really connected to and were people that I thought were my friends were not, and were only as long as I was in the group. And I realized that if this could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. And if I could start to really change my belief system and believe things that I wouldn't normally believe, it could happen to anyone. But I also know that when people are in it, they can't see it. And so the stuff that's going on right now with Jaclyn and Morgan, I feel for Morgan because I'm sure there is some truth to what Jaclyn is saying, but I spent time speaking to Morgan, and she was speaking in a language that I really understood because it was the way that our church spoke to us. The spirit and the way that she talked about it moving within her and her beliefs about medicine and, you know, a lot of different things were very similar to the church that I went to. And so it was easy for me to say, like, no, you're fine. Do I think she's fine? I really don't know. But I don't think it's probably as bad as Jaclyn is saying. I will say that I spoke to Morgan, and she's a nice person. And I don't think that this all falls on Paul. I think people get to a point with their beliefs on their own, and we can't ever blame one person. Couples walk in faith together. I know I was able to drag my husband into it, so people could have easily said that my husband did it to me, or I did it to him. You know what I mean? So I think this week was kind of a shell shock for me because I knew that that's what Paul and Morgan were from. I knew that that's where they came from. I knew that that's sort of what their belief was. And I think they feel familiar to me. And I wanted so badly to believe her. And I don't know what to say. I'll say that Morgan, behind the scenes, I spoke to her for an hour and a half, is a very nice person. I don't agree with her. I don't agree with a lot of the things that she says. I don't agree with her points of view on many things. And I told her that repeatedly. But I also know that when you're in the middle of that and you're in the thick of it, and if that's what your belief system is, no matter what I say and no matter what I do, I can't pull you out of that. You have to come to that realization yourself. But I had this very profound moment when I was sitting there with her, and I was thinking, if she's ever going to get out, the last thing that she needs are people on the outside screaming at her and telling her that her husband is a bad person and, going to her YouTube page and telling her to leave him and leave the doctrine. If I know anything about my own experience, I know it took me time and reflection and really to think through what was going on in my life. I didn't stay as long as some people, but it can really truly happen to anyone. We were there for about 3 years, and my life was completely flipped upside down. I mean, some of my closest friends were anti-LGBTQ+, which is insane because look at my pillows. That is not negotiable in my family, you know. But I also know that sometimes when people are so heavy in something, they just need a bit of kindness. And so I realized that earlier today I did a video where I shared my conversation with Morgan, and everyone thought, oh, you're subscribing to her, you're co-signing what she believes, you're taking her side. And I was like thinking, no, I'm not taking her side. I'm just being a human and offering a little bit of compassion and saying, if we want to help someone open their mind, the best thing that we can do is be kind to them and not remind them all of the bad things they've said, You can push people and challenge them, but we don't have to make them feel bad about who they are. Because when I was in my thick of it, nothing you would have said would have ever convinced me otherwise. And I would have spewed out the same things that she said about how she has choices and how women are totally fine and that submission isn't what you think it is. That was what we always said. Submission isn't what you think it is. But I don't want to be a channel that picks fights with other channels. And so I think when I saw what happened with Morgan, I just wanted to extend an olive branch. And I know that might surprise you guys, but I really truly feel like you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And if you can just be nice, maybe you'll be that person that helps people see that the people of this world aren't bad, because that's what people need. They need to see good humanity. So I don't co-sign what they believe. I don't subscribe to it. I think what they believe is terrible. Terrible. I also know how indoctrination works, and I know how churches can make things appear to not feel like you're being bad. You don't even know that you're being hateful because you're cloaked in, well, this is what the Bible says, and that's what God wants. And so you don't even realize that you're being ignorant or intolerant. And I guess I don't necessarily say like, yes, there's nothing to worry about here, but at the same time, like, I've been there. I was involved in it. And that's probably why I do what I do. Part of the reason, because I lost everything. And now I just want to help educate people. And my biggest thing is that I don't like how women are treated, and I don't like how children are treated, and I don't like the patriarchy of it, and how a man should be above a God, next to God, and then a woman below it. Because no matter how you shake it, no relationship should have an imbalance like that, because it automatically lends itself to injustice and abuse. And no matter how many times people say that it's just a book, or, you know, we're not going to go there, I see it happen so much. And the men get drunk on power. I saw the pastor get drunk on power. I saw drunk on intoxicated on the income that was coming in, on the power of telling people what to do and how to feel. And, you know, and then the men are told to tell their families what to do and what to feel, and the women are taught to do what their husbands say and serve their families. And so you feel like you're saying all the right things and that you feel like you have a choice, but at the end of the day, it's not really a choice, and there's no such thing as consent. And so now, not all churches are like that at all. So I'm not saying that every single thing is, but I've been to places like Morgan and Paul, and I know what it's like, and it's definitely very cult-like. And so I don't think what Jaclyn did was appropriate if she was really concerned about her. But I think she should be concerned because of what the organization is that she's involved in. But at the same time, if you truly are concerned about someone, Jaclyn, just call them, email them, talk to them. I spent an hour and a half with Morgan, and I'm not worried about her today. I think she's pretty fiery. I think she could take care of herself. But I also know that I can't make her go there because I want her to. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyways, that's my story. That's my journey. That's why I do what I do. That's how I got involved in a rock and roll cult. Let me know if you can relate. Oh my God.